Okay, everyone, let's get started. Welcome back. So hopefully last week was helpful. I want to start with a reminder that you must finish that survey by June 12th. I'll probably remind you again just in case, a future day, but June 12th is the day where we will all be doing those surveys. And we'll just analyze the data in class to keep it simple. Once you've made it, go ahead and try it yourself a few times just to see if there are any bugs. That's a good general practice to do. And on the subject of the surveys, I want to say a few things that I forgot to say in previous classes. Number one, if you are desperate and you can't think of an experiment to do, I decided that I am going to allow replications. What I'll say about that is, if you do a replication, you have more of a burden to explain why it matters. There should be conflicting results or some other issue. So if you do a replication, I'm going to be pickier with marking because you are kind of taking an easier road. But if you're not very creative and can't think of something new to do, that is an option. I'll just be a little bit pickier with the marking. Yes?
Do you have time for after class for a few quick questions about that?
100%. So luckily for today, chapters 3 and 4 shouldn't take, especially 4 shouldn't take too long. So there'll be time at the end of class for questions both about the surveys and about test 1, which I'll say later again is next week. So next week is test 1. I'll say a bit more about that at the end of class. I'll tell you all what the written questions will be, which I'm sure you all want to know. Although also June 12th, that's not the week after the test, but the week after that. So it's still a ways away, but you should be thinking about that. Someone asked me this on the way in. Qualtrics, which is the survey design platform, you can use on any computer. It's SPSS, which is the statistical Excel-like thing, that you need a special computer for. So here, I think the library, but only some of the computers at the college use it. I think the library ones and the ones here have SPSS, but if you want to use it at home, you have to spend money.
Does the Cyclab have it?
Sorry?
Does the Cyclab have it?
There's one
Yes.
computer in the psych lab that has it, as far as I'm aware, the library doesn't.
I tried at least I tried the library at Coquitlam and it had it.
Oh.
So maybe the newest one doesn't. For sure, this one does. So, although actually, we will be going through how to analyze the data again on June 12th. So for now, your priority is making the survey on Qualtrics. On the subject of finding an idea, if you don't want me to mark your paper more strictly by doing because you did a replication, there was a quote I was going to read from Karl Popper, and this is good general advice for coming up with an idea. Often undergrads, and even grad students too, when they try to think of an idea, they think they have to solve the mind-body problem, at least some undergrads. You should remember that what you're doing is you're making a contribution to an area of research. You should immerse yourself in an area of research and know what the questions are, know what the debates are, and all you're doing is you're moving it one little step forward, right? You do not have to put more pressure on yourself than you need to. So I'm going to read this, I think, really helpful quote from Popper, a bit of a longer quote, but I found it helpful as a grad student. A young scientist who hopes to make discoveries is badly advised if his teacher tells him, go around and observe. So it basically, just go observe, use empiricism. That by itself is not helpful. He is well advised, and Popper is writing a while ago, so nowadays we wouldn't say he, but he is well advised if his teacher tells him, try to learn what people are discussing nowadays in science. Find out where the difficulties are, and take an interest in disagreements. These are the questions you should take up. In other words, you should study the problem situation of the day. This means you pick up and try to continue a line of inquiry which has the whole background of earlier development behind it. It is a very simple and decisive point, but nevertheless one that is often not sufficiently realized. We cannot start afresh. We cannot start from nothing. We must make use of what people have done before in science. In science, we want to make progress, and this means we must stand on the shoulders of our predecessors. We carry on in a certain tradition. Let's skip ahead a little bit. The scientific tradition tells us that people have already constructed a theoretical framework. Maybe not a very good one, maybe one that needs improvement, but it's one that works more or less, and it serves as a kind of network that you can start with. We use the framework by checking it over, by criticizing it, and by extending it. In this way, we make progress. So that's a good way to think about it. Immerse yourself in a particular line of research, find out where the debates are, what the open questions are, and try to make, as I say, a little step forward. Okay, any general housekeeping questions before we get started on chapters 3 and 4? Yes?
I just wanted to inquire, as far as the survey topics go, I have a memory of a statement along the lines of there being like almost approved topics for the survey, and if you pick something outside of that,
Nope.
then we have to talk to you. So we don't have to talk to you about what the survey.
Oh, so as far as talking to me, you should only run it by me if you're unsure about the ethics of it. Like, so if it's, and there the general rule is err on the side of caution. But as far as topics, any psych topic is fine. If there's journals on the general topic, in like articles in psych journals about that topic, that's fine. The only constraint I'm imposing is, don't do anything that's ethically questionable. And if you're unsure, just email me. That's the only case in which you have to run it by me.
Okay.
Okay, so chapter 3 is about research ethics. As you all probably know, the impetus for a lot of this stuff was some famous, or maybe better said, infamous studies, particularly in social psychology. And two of them in particular are probably the most famous studies in the history of psychology. If you ask ChatGPT, what is the most famous study in psychology, and ask it to give just one answer, the Stanford Prison Experiment is the answer that it gives. And so I'm actually going to spend some time on this one. So I'll start with just the basics. So as you all probably know at this point, maybe even before you took psych, the basic setup, at least as Zimbardo presents it, this is done by a very famous psychologist named Philip Zimbardo. The narrative he presents is, he got these students, these all-male students, into the lab, randomly assigned them to either be guards or prisoners. And because of the role of being a guard, and because of the situation of a prison environment, the guards became assholes. As he sometimes says, there's the barrel corrupted the people. It wasn't because of their traits or because of their personality, it was because of the situation. That's a really nice story. It's very compelling, and for that reason, very famous. However, inconveniently, that description of the study is at best highly misleading, and at worst an elaborate fraud. So some of you know this already. I'm seeing some nods. Zimbardo essentially told the guards to be jerks. There's now quite a bit of evidence for this. I say this for a few reasons. It illustrates two principles we talked about back in chapter 1. One is skepticism. Just a good general lesson. Just because something is in a textbook doesn't mean it's true. And a related one is that value I mentioned of being disinterested. Zimbardo, part of the motivation for doing this study was he wanted to push for prison reform. Now, that's a good value. I'm not against prison reform. You look at what some countries, like say Norway, have done, impressive stuff. But when you look at the details of how the study was done, it's quite clear that he wanted a particular outcome in order to more effectively argue for prison reform. Arguably, this is one of the reasons why he presented the results in such a misleading or maybe fraudulent way. Lots of stuff online is available about this. For example, the great interview Robert Wright did on this. If you look up Robert Wright, Stanford Prison Experiment, he goes over a lot of the stuff. But a new, even more in-depth analysis was done by the Natural Geographic channel. They did a 3-part documentary, and we will watch some of this for fun. This is one of the longer videos I'll show. I thought about showing the whole thing because this chapter is kind of short, but I'll just show some of the highlights. If you want to watch the whole thing, it's on Disney+.
Oh, okay.
So there you go.
What's it called?
Just if you just go to Disney+, look up Stanford Prison. There's only one thing there. So
I think it's also on Prime, because I heard it's the.
there's a few
the-
different.
They sometimes
Is it
migrate.
new?
Yeah.
So the one in 2024, I don't think it's on Prime, but maybe it is. But there's a few documentaries. This one came out just this year, or within the last year. I feel a little bad for Zimbardo. He died less than a year after this documentary came out. I'm not saying that's why, but yeah, who knows? Study that. Yeah, exactly. It was a good topic. So, first video of the day. We'll watch some of the key parts of this documentary. Okay, there. I'll leave you all in a little bit of suspense. So, you can watch the rest on Disney Plus or
And Prime.
wherever. So a lot of important stuff there. So we didn't watch all of it. One thing I didn't get to, there's documentation of one person who worked for Zimbardo telling one guard in particular, "You're being too nice. You need to be meaner." So sometimes it was like that explicit. And another key thing in the video was the replication attempt. So there was an attempt to replicate it without the explicit instruction to be jerks, and then you don't get the abusive behavior. Yes.
How is that ethical?
Which study? The replication?
Everything.
So good. So so right now I'm kind of going on a bit of a tangent, sort of about the scientific validity of it. But of course, the main purpose of bringing this up is your question, which is nowadays you have a very hard time getting away with a study like this. I guess the study you saw where they tried to replicate it was the BBC. Maybe there's looser regulations there. Although in the end, nothing happened, so I guess it's okay. But sorry, you had a hand too.
Oh, sorry, yeah, in response to that, I mean, technically speaking, if everyone's agreed to it, the be-all end-all is most of the prisoners in the Stanford Prison Experiment, they did walk into it blind.
Yeah, so
They did not know that what everyone had been given permission to do to them.
good. So yeah. So
Anyway, I'm sorry, but that wasn't what I was gonna say.
that's one of the issues we'll get into. But so this and another study we'll talk about in a second was one of the reasons why the ethics requirements got stricter, which is the main reason for bringing it up here. I assume you all know what's the other famous social psych study that
Baby?
Milgram.
Yeah.
So the other big one is the Milgram study. Now, I will say, the Zimbardo study is both ethically and scientifically flawed. The Milgram study only potentially ethically flawed. Although even there's some pushback you can make. Scientifically, Milgram was very serious. He did careful replications. He varied the conditions carefully. So the scientific validity of Milgram is much better, and subsequent replication attempts have been successful. For those of you who don't know, which is probably none of you, the Milgram study is the one where people come into the lab, they are assigned the role of teacher, someone else is given the role of learner. Here's a technical term, it's probably review, but the learner is a confederate. This is one of the terms on the list. A confederate is someone who is working for the experimenter, but is pretending to be a subject. Right, so another example is the Ash study, right, where you get people to say that two lines are the same length even when they're not. The people who all give the wrong answer, that say, oh yeah, C is the right length, those are also confederates, yes. So it's someone who is working for the experimenter, but is pretending to be a subject. And that's fine. You can still do that today. That's not viewed as ethically wrong as long as you mention something like that in the debriefing form.
Or like actors.
Yeah, actor. That's a good synonym. An actor in a psych study. So I do have some footage of this too. You know, hey, well, we'll have some fun. We have some extra time. This is a shorter video, but in case you haven't seen footage of this, it's really quite something. Okay, I'll stop it there. So one interesting thing that's worth thinking about in this case, so just to play devil's advocate, at the end of this study, they were told, obviously it's a simulation, that that person didn't die. Interestingly enough, 84% of subjects said they were pleased that they participated. So that's interesting. Now, whatever, be that as it may, you would definitely not get away with doing it today. One thing that's missing, as someone pointed out for the other study, was informed consent. They were not told up front that this will be a study in which you are led to believe that you've killed someone. And nowadays, if there's anything in the study that's potentially unpleasant, you have to warn them about it before they participate. So let's go through some more terms. So in Canada, the guiding statement is the Tri-Council Policy Statement. You don't have to know what the three groups are, but they're the three main funding groups in Canada for research. Two that are really important in psych are NSERC and SSHRC. SSHRC is a bit more important. That's Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council for Canada. You don't need to know that, but so Tri-Council Policy Statement now in its second edition, so TCPS2. That's it's actually available online if you want to look it up and work through it. The details are not testable, but that's what the TCP2 is. So that I'll write that term out. So as I mentioned, very important principle now in research ethics is informed consent. So in our goofy little studies, there will be a consent statement, right, where there's a brief description of what's in the study, including anything potentially upsetting. So when I did work on moral psychology, I would have to include in the consent statement that you may think about some things that are potentially upsetting or unpleasant, as an example. Okay, there are three core ethical principles that guide our ethical standards in psych research. These are repeated later, so they are all on the key terms list, but it looked goofy to have them twice. So you can take notes now or again when I go through them each in more detail and some of the associated terms. But the three are respect for persons, concern for welfare, and justice. So I'll tell you what each of these mean, and then as a little aside that may help some of you, I will explain kind of the philosophical counterpart to each one. Some of you may find that interesting, or you may find that it gives you something to remember it by, but the philosophical aside I'll go on is not testable. So respect for persons is about respecting the autonomy of persons. So people have the right to decide whether they want to participate on their own terms. No matter how cool you think your study is, you can't force people into doing your study, to put it sort of bluntly. And even indirect ways of reducing autonomy is unacceptable. So that's the first one. The philosophical aside, this one has the most in common with what we might call a Kantian ethic. So there are different philosophical positions about what right and wrong are. A Kantian approach is usually contrasted with a utilitarian approach, which is more similar to the second principle. Can anyone tell me what utilitarian means? I was taking a philosophy class, yeah. Greatest good for the greatest number. So basically all that matters is, does the action increase happiness and or reduce suffering? That's what makes an action good or bad. And in certain cases that leads to things that seem wrong at first, like the famous case, it means it's okay to push someone in front of a trolley to save 5 others. That's like the famous, a utilitarian would say that's right. Whereas people in the Kantian tradition tend to say that some actions are wrong regardless of what their consequences are. So even if certain actions produce more benefits or more happiness or whatever, they're still wrong. So like lying, for example, the Kantians tend to say lying is just wrong. Even if you're lying to make someone feel good or to save someone's life, it's just wrong. And more specifically, one thing that Kant himself emphasized is autonomy, allowing people to have the free will to make their own decisions. That's good, and violating people's free will is wrong, even if it produces good consequences. So this first principle has more in common with the Kantian tradition in ethics, although the Kantian part, as I say, is not testable.
Is that K-O-N?
K-A-N. You were right to complain. So Kant.
Sorry, I'm just trying to spell it, and I'm like, what am I looking at?
Although, as I say, if you can't spell it, you'll be okay, because that won't be on the test. But so welfare, the second one, is about doing a cost-benefit analysis. So what are the benefits of doing the study, and what are the risks or downsides? You want the benefits to outweigh the risks or the downsides. That's a very utilitarian way of thinking. And then the last one has the most in common with a Rawlsian view of ethics. So I'll start by saying what justice is. Justice is about treating people, and particularly groups, fairly. How many of you have heard of I never know how to say it, the Tuska something syphilis study? So maybe a third or so. So we'll say more about this later. That one. So that study was a study in which they got a group of African Americans with syphilis, and even though effective treatments became available, they didn't tell them that and let their symptoms worsen over time so they could see how syphilis worked. They chose African Americans. They were sort of at the bottom rung of society in the United States, so they thought, we can get away with this. So that would be an example of violating the justice principle.
Would you be able to say that definition one more time?
So treating people and groups fairly. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Sorry.
What this one's about. No, it's fine. That's what I get paid for. So Rawls, as another not testable aside, thought that the way you decide what's right or wrong is you ask, what principles would we agree to if we were behind a veil of ignorance? Veil of ignorance meaning none of us know who we will be. We don't know what our race will be, what our gender will be, and we have to then negotiate what the rules for society are. And the intuition you're supposed to have is, well, obviously if I'm behind the veil of ignorance, I'm not going to make the rules be, okay, the white guys get everything, right? You're going to make it impartial with regard to group identity. So that's a way of thinking that would be most consistent with the justice principle. Right? You would never make the rules, we'll do all the risky studies with the African Americans to make it, safer for the rest of us. If you're behind the veil of ignorance, you would not endorse a principle like that. Any questions? We'll talk about each of these in a bit more detail now and give some related terms, but any questions about the general meaning of each?
I just have a little bit of brain fog, but like when you were first saying these are the 3 principles of the ethics, or no?
Yes.
The principles.
Yes, the principles that guide ethics. So, that's what these.
And there are 3 of them?
And there are 3, yeah. So these are the big 3, if you like. Okay, so we'll zoom in first to the welfare one. That's the one the book does first. So some related terms, so risk-benefit analysis, which is really at the core of the welfare principle. So you do an analysis of all the potential benefits of the study. You know, it'll cure X disease, it will allow us to help kids in this way or whatever. Also benefits the participants, that counts too, like if it's going to teach them about psychology, like in the debriefing form or what have you, or just give them experience with how psychology is done, all of that counts as potential benefits. And you have to weigh those benefits against the potential risks. So the most obvious types are physical and psychological harm. So if it's a drug trial, for example, obviously there's always the risk of there being side effects. So that's a risk you have to take into account. That would count as physical harm, of course. And of course, very acute in the Zimbardo and Milgram cases, there's the risk of psychological stress. So you always have to take that into account. I mentioned that I did work on moral dilemmas. I got very unlucky. This is kind of a sad story, but really bad luck on my part. In one study, I randomly assigned people to 5 conditions. Everyone got a number of self-sacrificial dilemmas. So the dilemmas were about, would you be willing to sacrifice yourself to save someone else? Some of them involved death, some of them didn't. The 5 conditions were about who is the person you are self-sacrificing for, sort of in order of relational closeness. I think one was sibling, one was romantic partner, all the way down to stranger. Someone was randomly assigned to the sibling condition, and their sibling had died like that month.
No.
So they complained, which, fair enough. So then we added, obviously, a proviso that maybe don't do this study if you had a tragedy recently. So things like that, is something that you have to think about when weighing whether or not to do the study. A final risk, yes, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I'm sure it's in the book as well, but can you tell me about when this entire thing came down, timing?
You don't need to know years. I mean, they are
No,
in
I'm
the
just
book.
curious because of
Yeah, you
knowing when these happened, and I'm like, oh, okay, so when did?
You won't be tested on it. I don't remember the years. You can find it in the book.
Okay.
So the next, and I think last type of risk is the risk of losing privacy or confidentiality. So very important that you not publicize people's responses to these kinds of surveys or studies. The book distinguishes between keeping data confidential and keeping the responses anonymous. So sometimes these are used lazily and interchangeably. Anonymous in this book is a higher standard. Confidential means only the researcher knows names and other identifying information. So it's in the data set. It's just that you don't publish that. You don't say, Jim had a 6 out of 7 on the extroversion question or whatever. It's just kept in the data set. If it's anonymous, that means it's not even in the data set. Right? The data are anonymized. So there's no identifying information with the responses in the SPSS file. So anonymous is the stronger one, or anonymity is the stronger one. So confidential, to put it really bluntly, if the names, etc., are in the data set, but you keep it to yourself, it's confidential. If even the SPSS file doesn't have the names or identifying information, then the data are anonymized.
But what category is it? What big?
Oh, so this is a risk. This is another risk. So risk of the loss of privacy, I guess is the way to say it. So we're still, yes, sorry, if you're asking which broad category, we're still with welfare. So this is another risk that you have to put into the risk-benefit analysis. Okay, and that is the last bit of the welfare section. Any questions about the welfare section? Yep.
How is it ethical for
No comment. I don't know. Probably not. I don't know the details of that case, but that sounds unethical to me. Yep.
So, for all the definitions for these, do we just say that they're part of the risk-benefit analysis?
No. Well, I mean, you could include that. As far as on the test, you wouldn't have to include that. Just say what each one means, like just sort of in itself. If you want to add some flourish and say this is part of the welfare section of the book, yeah, you won't lose marks for saying that. Yep.
Does justice, sorry, skipping topics a little bit, does justice include actively trying to seek out different groups in your research?
Yes, I believe so. Although that wouldn't be, it would be unusual for that to be a basis upon which the study would not get ethically approved, but they'll give you a frowny face if you exclude people without a good scientific basis. The book mentions that, but in my experience, I doubt that that would be enough for the study to not get ethically approved, but you get demerits if it's, yeah, that would be the way to think about that. Okay, so the next one is respect for persons. So the big one here is informed consent, which we've already talked about. So informed consent would, broadly speaking, fall under the respect for persons principle, because it's about autonomy, right? You don't view yourself as, you know, the expert on what's good for people. You let people decide whether they want to participate in the study or not. And as again, I think I already mentioned, the informed part means you have to be upfront about the potential risks. You don't have to inform them about everything. Some deception is allowed, as I'll say in a bit, but you can't deceive or leave out parts that could be potentially upsetting. That you have to be upfront about. Another crucial point, informed consent can be withdrawn at any time. Just because they sign the consent form at the beginning doesn't mean they now have to stay in the study. Should be obvious, but you have to say obvious things, just to be sure. A related issue is different types of coercion, subtle and not so subtle. So if there's any sense that someone is being pressured to do a study, that is ethically problematic. So for example, if it's a boss getting employees to do a survey, that's potentially, the ethics board will look carefully at how you do that, because there could be potential coercion. Similarly with prisoners doing a study or other cases like that. Yes.
Wouldn't getting points in a class in order to participate in a study be considered some level of coercion for similar reasons?
Yeah, so the standard thing that's done in every institution I've been in is there has to be an alternative assignment where you can still get the marks. So that's true here. That maybe we don't always flag as much as we should, but it's always the case, as far as I know from the institutions I've been in, that there's always another option. Usually it's some writing assignment, like you have to summarize a paper or something. Because yeah, if that option's not there, then that would qualify as coercion. A related issue that raises potential ethical issues vis-a-vis autonomy is the secondary use of data. Sorry, yes, go ahead.
Just on the coercion point, I don't see why it would matter if someone not involved in the study is saying, hey, do the study. So I don't see why it would be.
So you mean like
insight courses, you're told you can get marks if you participate in research, but presumably the professor isn't involved in the research.
Yeah, that's a good, interesting point. So I think it is still potentially problematic in my understanding, even if they're not the one doing the study. I don't think it's a defense that, oh, they're just my lackey. They're not actually the one analyzing the data at the end. So I think that would still at least be problematic vis-a-vis coercion.
I know that the studies here are bonus marks.
That's true too. So actually here at Douglas, there's an extra, I guess, layer of protection against coercion charges, which is that here it's bonus marks. At some courses at the U of A, it was actually part of the grade, which makes it more problematic, but the defense they would use there as well, there's an alternative assignment. So as I was saying, the secondary use of data is when the data were collected for one reason, but are reanalyzed later for another reason, and you could object on autonomy grounds and say, you know, the person consented to have their data used in X way, and you're using it for Y way, you know, for some other purpose. Now, I don't think that's, again, enough to get a study disqualified on its own, as far as I know, but it is a potential issue related to autonomy. Now, as I mentioned, deception is still allowed, particularly about the purpose of the study. It's not uncommon for researchers to say or imply that the study is about one topic, even if it's about another one. So in my own case, I will confess, to get it off my conscience, that I would lie to subjects about a study I did about confirmation bias. This is gonna, I don't know why I'm writing this, but so this is what I was studying, confirmation bias. But I didn't want people thinking about how biased they were and responding differently on that basis. So I told them the study was about memory and set it up so that it looked plausible that that's what it was about. So as to keep their responses more authentic. So that's allowed, but you just have to talk about that in the debriefing form. So the debriefing form, which in our surveys will be very short, is a document at the end of the survey where you describe what your study is about. So my hypothesis was this, and this is why I included these questions or this manipulation. And if you engaged in any deception, you must admit to it in the debriefing form. Like, hey, sorry, we kind of lied to you, but we did it so that your responses would be more authentic. Sorry about that. Something to that effect.
I have a question.
Yep.
I'm curious about debriefing with the secondary use of data. Is it possible that you're like, okay, I want to use data for different things, I'm not allowed to, but if I send the participants, like, if I ask for consent for the data to be used for the second thing, would that be okay?
That's an interesting question. So, yeah, actually, I'm not sure. You won't be tested on what the solution is in a case like that. I'm not sure if that's required. Like, you know, in other words, I'm not sure that if it's required that you have to send a debriefing to someone in order to engage in secondary use of data. Since I don't know, I will not test you on it. Now, there are two alternatives to deception that the book talks about, well, at least two that I'll go over. One is role playing, so you don't have to deceive someone, you can just tell them to sort of imagine you're doing such and such. So like, how would you behave in a case like this? Another case where deception really isn't possible is simulation studies. So of course, one example of a simulation study is the Zimbardo study. You know, the guard, no one thinks they're actually in a prison. He at least didn't go that far. You know, the guards know it's not real. The prisoners know it's not real. Well, there's some question as far as whether they thought they were allowed out. Zimbardo at various points would say that you're not allowed to leave, but maybe you are. So on that front, not so much of a simulation.
I thought they conducted real arrests.
They did conduct real arrests, but the subjects knew it was part of a psychology study in the basement of the university. At least to that extent, it's a simulation study.
But the other people did.
The other people around them don't know, yes. The ethical problems abound with the Zimbardo study. No, okay. So the last principle is the justice one. So I think maybe a third of you said you had heard of the Tuskegee, or however you say it.
Tuskegee.
Yes. So that's why I don't say it. Syphilis study. So I'll show a video of that, and then Okay, so pretty terrible example, but this is one of the reasons why justice is now emphasized. I'll add a bit to what I said earlier. So it's about equality or fairness. And to be more specific, fairness in terms of access to the benefits of research. So like in that case, having access to the treatments that were available for syphilis. But also fairness in terms of exposure to the risks, right? Not taking vulnerable groups and exposing them to heightened risk because you think that's convenient or you're more likely to get away with it. So the section on justice is a bit shorter. I mentioned earlier you can connect this to Rawls' idea of the veil of ignorance if that helps you remember it, but that bit's not testable. Any questions on the justice principle? Okay, so at all Canadian institutions, if you want to do almost any study, and there's one exception I'll talk about, but almost any study, you have to run it by an REB, a Research Ethics Board. So there's 3 levels that the book talks about. So the first one, which I just mentioned in passing, is exempt research. So there are some types of studies you don't need ethics approval for. Broadly speaking, if it's public data, right? So it's just available publicly, that, and you want to just do some statistical analyses of that. You don't need ethics approval for that. If you are watching people in public, so you're doing naturalistic observation, like you're sitting at the mall taking notes on what people are doing, don't need ethics approval for that. Like if you're not interacting with them in any way, you don't have to go to the ethics board. Or if you are analyzing, I guess, doing what we earlier called secondary use of data that is already anonymized. So if the data is anonymized, you don't need ethics approval for it. Now, if you're operating from the respect for persons principle, you could object to it, but as far as the current practice goes, you do not need ethics approval to do secondary use of data if the data is anonymized. So that's exempt research. And those examples are just so you have a sense of how it works, but the definition of the term is just research you don't need ethics approval for. That's all that it means. The next level, which in psych is the vast majority of research, is minimal risk research. So this you do need ethics approval for. Minimal risk here means risk that is not greater than what you would face in everyday life. That's the benchmark. If it's the kind of, getting asked questions about yourself, thinking about hypothetical scenarios, doing a survey on a computer screen, that's not more intense or more unpleasant than stuff you face in everyday life. So it's classified as minimal risk. You still have to submit it to an ethics board, but it's a fairly simple process. Although the ethics boards are good at making it harder than it needs to be. I will just say in passing that in the neuroscience lab at the U of A where I used to work, I sort of became the ethics person who would submit things to ethics. I developed a level of contempt for them because they would always waste my time with stuff that didn't matter. I mean, to be clear, I'm glad we have ethics boards, but they're not supposed to question the validity of the research. It's explicitly not their job. One time too, I listed the lab email on a poster we were going to put up, and they said that's not enough. There can't just be the lab email. There has to be a personal email as well. And I thought, what would we do without you guys? I mean, that's you're earning your salary there.
Does that mean you could subject people to greater risk if you select people from scaffolders or roofers compared to
That's an interesting
bankers?
question, because then that would seem to violate the justice principle. But I don't think it works that individually, but then I guess what's the
And whose
Well,
life?
what's what-
Whose daily life?
yeah,
are we
whose
talking
daily life?
about?
That's I don't know. That's a very good question. Maybe just the average person, but then that seems weird. Then what if there's like an outlier who drags it up? But let's put it this way: another question that's fun, but that you will not have to worry about for the test. What was I saying? Oh yeah, I was just to get one shot in at the ethics boards. I think a lot of people are highly motivated to tell themselves their job matters more than it does. So I think that's why sometimes they drove me crazy with stuff like that. But that's just my own grudge. Okay, so the next one is greater than minimal risk research. So as you could piece together, this is research that presents more risk than stuff you would face in everyday life. That has to be approved by the full REB committee. In the other case, it's just one person on the committee. So like when I would submit my surveys to the ethics board, it was one person typically who would look over it and make sure it was all up to snuff. I saw it. Yep.
Yeah, I just missed it. So exempt research, minimal risk research, and then what's the last one?
Greater than minimal risk research. So that's the one that needs the approval of not just one member, but the full REB committee. So in this class, you do not submit anything to the ethics board. It is my responsibility to make sure everything is done ethically. So as I've said, the way I'm going to do that is just err on the side of caution, and if you're unsure, email me. There, that's how I would do it. Okay, so the next section is on ethical standards for animal research. As probably most of you know, here the standards are much, much lower. I knew someone who worked in, I think it was with rats, it's always rats, and she couldn't do it. She would get attached to the rats, and in a way the ethics made it harder because they would make you be as nice as possible to them through the process, and then you wind up killing them anyway, so she changed fields. So you can do terrible things to animals even if there's not a medical or practical benefit. You can do the research even if it's just to figure out how the amygdala works or whatever. There's sad cases you read about in neuroscience classes where they would do things like take out the frontal lobes of the monkeys and then go, the monkeys can't do this anymore. It looks like the frontal lobes were important for that task. So the bar is low. Having said that, there are guidelines for doing the work, and the easy way to remember them is the 3 R's. So these are the 3 R's of animal ethics, or good animal practice in science. The first is replacement. If you can answer the question without animals by doing modeling or other sorts of work, try to err on the side of doing that. So where possible, just don't do animal research. Reduction, so reducing specifically the number of animals being used. If you can get the result with fewer animals, that's better. And final one, refinement, means changing the procedure to minimize pain. So if you can give an anesthetic during any of the procedures, you can do anything like that that makes it less painful, that is also an ethical principle. So as you, yes?
Is there any differentiation between the different types of animals and what you could do with them?
I think there was a country where, maybe it's broader than that, but I know some people have tried to move, say, the great apes into the category of person so that they are exempt from, someone's nodding, is that this in the UK, or is it broader than that? Anyways, I'm pretty sure in at least one country, and maybe more than that, the great apes are now kind of in a separate category, because they're our closest cousins, they have big brains, more sophisticated experience. So I know that's at least one move. Beyond that, I'm not sure if there's differentiation, although as an aside, I studied ethics in my master's. I think there definitely should be a differentiation. I mean,
Huh.
it's definitely, in my judgment, more wrong to harm a monkey than, I don't know, like an ant in this country. But
It's the United Kingdom, New Zealand, Netherlands, Austria, and Sweden.
okay, at least have one. Okay. Yeah.
Hasn't there been a movement in recent years to get like other groups of animals moved to like a different ethical placement, like octopi? And
Yeah,
lobsters
I've heard
and
of
stuff,
octopi.
because
Yeah,
they're
octopi are weird.
sentient?
They're like the smartest like non-mammals. Like they're,
Yeah.
Yeah. So no, that sounds right. I had heard about octopi. So there's more that you won't be tested on, but if you're curious about this kind of thing, yes, there is a movement. Many of you will be sort of the future of the field, or at least some of you. These are interesting questions. I do actually have a video on some of the related ethical issues, just as something to think about. This is another case where this is not testable, but some of you may find this interesting. Okay, so as I say, that's more just food for thought related to this subject in the book. I think that's a natural place for a break. Let's come back at 5:05. Okay, everyone, let's get started again. So, based on some of the questions I got during the break, all right, wrap up your conversation, even if you're special.
You're very special. I'm talking about work subjects.
So, I'll do a bit of review on what you're supposed to do for the survey. So, as far as finding questions, you can just make them up if you want. It's better if you find them from previous studies. So again, just broad strokes, you're going to get the sample, which is just this class, the Qualtrics survey. So you all should have made a copy of the template, the one that now says do not edit unless you're as David Simpson. So you'll take that, make a copy of it. That should give you the skeleton. So there will already be a randomization element. So people will be randomly assigned to two conditions. So last week, those two conditions were, the independent variable was type of movie. So there was the horror movie condition where you have to think about and describe a horror movie, and the comedy condition. So that's the independent variable. And you need two dependent variables because you're gonna look for a correlation between these two. And you're going to look at whether the independent variable affected either of these. So in my case, one of the DVs was extroversion, and one was happiness. Right? So there's two. In this case, in my survey, there's just one question. And look, that's kind of a joke, but if you want to do that, it's fine. If you want to just have one question as the DV for each, frankly, it'll make things go faster. What I would more so looking for is maybe like a short scale with like 5 items. That'd be more like the typical thing I'd want. But if you want to do one question for each DV, that's fine. But remember, you're going to have to look for a correlation between these two and do a t-test for each to see if the horror, this condition had higher scores in these two. So that's what your end product is going to be by, again, June 12th. And Google Scholar is your friend for finding ideas for what to do for scales, manipulations, etc. So any questions on that?
So we have to do t-test before June 12th?
Not before. So all you have to do before June 12th, you could have forgotten, well, I didn't really even teach you what a t-test is yet. I just quickly showed you how to push the buttons. All you have to have by June 12th is the survey. That's it. So on day-to-day, which is June 12th, we will all, everyone except me, will do the surveys, and then we'll analyze the data together. So that's what we're doing on that. Yes.
So you said find questions from existing surveys?
That's better if you can. You don't have to. You can make up the question if you want or if you're pressed for ideas, but I would say it's better if you can find a question or a scale from something that's already been done. Because remember, like I said at the beginning of class, it's better if you're building on something that's already been done. Or building on an area of research that already exists.
Are we expected to do this at home? Like, is it just the thing for?
You're expected to make it at home. You can make it at home or at the library. You can make it wherever you want, but there's not class time set aside to make the survey.
Like in what, like the.
In Qualtrics, yes.
Is there a certain amount of questions that you have to have?
So the bare minimum is, if you want to do the lazy way, kind of like my skeleton version, have one question for each, you could do that. So then you would have, I guess, 4 questions. So you have to have something here in condition 1, something in condition 2, and then both groups get asked the same 2 questions here. That would be the absolute minimum.
Sorry, so that's 4 questions for each.
No, I meant 4, just like as far as how, if some of you are very uncreative, you have to make up 1 thing for this, 1 for this, and then 2 here that each gets, so that's 4 total. 2 plus 2, that's 10. But yeah, so that's what I mean. So it doesn't have to be a minimum of 4 questions in each DV. So we're almost done chapter 3. Chapter 4 doesn't take that much time, so we'll probably have some time left over at the end of class, which is a good time if you want to ask questions, or if there's enough time, you could start doing some Qualtrics stuff now if you want, depending on how much time we have left. Okay, so the next section in ethics is on scientific misconduct, especially fraud. So here we get to what in science is the unforgivable sin. So if I found out, or if my colleagues found out that someone in our department had done a Milgram-style electrocution experiment, we would be very unhappy, but there would be a road to redemption. You know, there'd be some kind of penalty, you know, like there'd be, you know, a procedure for restoration or something. But if we found out someone in the department faked data in a study they did, there's really no way back. Like, your career in science is over. So making up data, you know, moving people between conditions to get an effect, stuff like that is the kind of the bright red line. And so there's some famous cases of this. The book talks about one, which is Diederik Stoffel. So maybe the most famous case of fraud in psychology. Now, in academia, we have very little as far as gossip. So I'll have some fun. There's a great podcast, 2 Psychologists, 4 Beers. And one of the hosts of that podcast was instrumental in uncovering Stoffel's fraud. And in one episode, he talks about it. So as an example of what's involved in uncovering this kind of thing, we'll watch some of this episode. All right, so as I say, we don't have much gossip in psychology, but there you go. There's one other case. I was going to show a video of this too, but I think you get the idea. But a more recent case, these are not super common when they come up. They're a very big deal. Was Francesca Gino. Some of you may have heard of this one. It made the rounds on the internet. She never confessed, though. She sued Harvard for defamation, lost the case. The evidence was overwhelming. So hopefully this video doesn't go viral. You know, I don't have money for lawyers. Maybe I'll edit this part out. But anyway, so as far as we can tell, it's rare. But as I say, this is essentially the unforgivable sin in science. There's a section on what plagiarism is. I won't insult your intelligence. I assume you all at this point know what plagiarism is. That's bad. Okay, that's the end of the ethics chapter. Any questions? Okay, so next we'll do the chapter on. Oh, yes, go.
You've got a key term here, ethical data analysis.
Oh.
It,
You know what? It's not on the test. Don't worry about it.
It's the title of one of the categories in the book, and it basically just means don't change numbers.
Oh, okay.
That's not ethical.
So it's like the opposite of fraud, I guess. Is what that is. Okay, there you go.
No, it is fraud. Yeah, I guess.
No, ethical. Unethical would be fraud.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes, fraud is unethical data analysis, and unethical data analysis is fraud.
Yay!
But it's not fraud to be dumb and make a mistake.
No, and that is true. Well, I don't know what you're saying.
Ironically, that's
Yes,
actually in the
but-
book as well.
But yeah,
That
no,
it's
that is true. So,
be
you know,
done.
there are cases where people just make honest mistakes. There's one article I know that was pulled, it was in my area, where it was just like a coding mistake. Coding mistakes are not unforgivable sins. That's, in fact, probably not uncommon. Okay, so the next chapter should not take too much time. So, of course, the core idea in sampling is the relationship between the sample and the population. So population in this context does not necessarily mean the population of a country, although it can be that if that's what you're interested in, but the population is the group you're interested in. It's the group you're going to draw conclusions about. So it could be all Canadians, it could be all university students in the province of British Columbia, it could be all humans. Psychologists often pretend that's their population, but if it is, then their samples are almost never representative. But it's whatever group of people you're interested in. But very rarely is an entire population studied. That's too much work, so you get a sample. You get a subset of the population that you study, which is your sample. And the key property that you want the sample to have is you want it to be representative. Representative means similar to the population in terms of demographics. Similar to the population in terms of demographics. So if the population is 50% male, the sample should be roughly 50% male. If the population is 10% people who are 65 and over, the sample should be roughly that percentage as well. A related term is external validity. We'll talk about internal validity in a later chapter. External validity is about how confident you can be that the results you got in your sample will generalize to the population. So hence external. It's about will the results be true outside of the lab or outside of your sample. So there are two main threats to external validity. One is having an unrepresentative sample. So if, take Lawrence Kohlberg, right? How many of you remember Kohlberg from, I guess, 1100 here? So Kohlberg is the moral development guy. He did a bunch of studies with only males and found certain patterns in moral responding. Well, it turns out that half the population is not males.
Funny that.
If funny that. So that would be a problem vis-a-vis external validity. Another threat that the book doesn't mention, but it's good to know about, is an unrealistic lab situation. So again, external validity is about will the results generalize beyond your study. If you found the patterns you found using a contrived or artificial lab situation, those results or patterns may not hold in the real world. So I've picked on a few people today in the history of psychology. I'll pick on myself. So I think I've mentioned that my area of research in grad school was moral psychology. So I'm interested in moral behavior and moral thinking. But what I'm in fact studying in the lab is how people respond to surveys where they click, yes or no, or answer questions on a scale. And you could object that in the real world, moral dilemmas don't present themselves to people in that way. So will those patterns hold in real life? You could be skeptical. So that's another threat to external. Any questions about this stuff? That's the end of the chapter. No, it's not quite that short. So So actually, I guess I should have kept. Well, I'll draw it a bit differently. So another term is sampling frame. This is a subset of the population. It's the part of the population that actually has a chance to be in the survey or in the sample. So let me just draw this again. So let's say this is the population. Let's use opinion polls as an example. So this isn't a psych thing per se, but so we had an election in this country recently. I'm sure many of you saw there were a number of opinion polls beforehand. Let's say I do an opinion poll using YouTube ads. That's how I recruit people to be in my sample, where I'm trying to guess what percentage of people are going to vote for the Liberals, for example. So the population is Canadian voters. That's the group I care about. But the sampling frame is Canadian voters who use YouTube, because those are the only people who have a chance of being in the survey, in the sample. And then of that, there's the 100 people who did my survey. That's the sample. So this sampling frame is kind of a subset of the population. It's the subset that actually has a chance of being selected. And obviously, to the extent that your sampling frame is different from the population, that's a problem, right? That means that makes it less likely that your sample will be representative. Another potential issue with representativeness is response rates. So how many people that you ask to be in the survey or that you present with the opportunity to be in the survey actually respond, actually do the survey? So let's say even that you do it really well. Let's say you do like a random sample where you have a complete list of everyone in the population. You get a random number generator to pick who you're going to call to ask who they're going to vote for. Not everyone picks up the phone. Not everyone who picks up the phone says nice things. So if you have a low response rate, again, that counts against the sample being representative. So I have a funny clip here from Joe Rogan. As I've said, showing video clips is not an endorsement of everything someone has said. Also, if you, there's some bad words in this video, so if you have virgin ears, but it is kind of funny, and it makes the point that, that response rate is relevant here. So he goes on from there. But now, the case he had a particular way of framing that, but you can think of more serious possibilities, right? Like people who answer surveys might be more committed, more devout, various other differences. And to the extent that people who respond to the survey are different from the kinds of people who just hang up or say mean things to the person calling, again, this counts against the sample being representative. Okay, so next we're going to talk about a number of specific sampling techniques. I'll be nice and mention some of them that I will guarantee will not be on the test. I'll still explain them just so you know what they mean if you run into them in the literature, but the one that you've all probably heard about is random sampling. Before talking about that, I want to quickly make sure that we all remember the difference between random sampling and random assignment. Students sometimes mix these up, but they are different. Random sampling, which I'll say more about in a second, is about choosing people to be in your study. So you have a list of everyone in the population, have the random number generator, and it picks who you ask. So that's about getting people into the lab or on the phone or whatever you're doing. Random assignment, you do that when they're already in your study. You already tricked them, not tricked them, you got them into the lab, and you randomly put them into one of two groups. Or it could be more than two, but we'll say two. But the point is, when you're doing random assignment, you're choosing what condition they go in. So like I did this with the survey, and you'll all be doing this with the survey. It's just built into Qualtrics in our case. So very important distinction. Now, random assignment's not relevant to our purposes for this chapter, but I just wanted to make sure that no one mixes those two things up. So everything I have to say from now on is about sampling. It's about getting people in to your sample. So broadly speaking, there are two types of sampling: probability sampling and non-probability sampling. Probability here means you can specify what the chances are that someone in the population will be in your sample. So it's about the probability that anyone in the population will get into your sample. So the most basic is simple random sampling. This means everyone in the population has an equal probability of being in the sample. So you have a complete list of everyone in the population and the random number generator. So let's pick, so just for the subsequent terms, I'll use the example. Let's say your population is students at UBC. It's not typically the way someone would define a population. It's quite a small one, but it'll keep it simple. So let's say that's the population, students at UBC, all 60,000 of them. So if you have a full list, and you have the random number generator, then you're doing the first count. A slightly better thing to do is stratify random sampling. So think back to the term representative, because our goal here is to have a representative sample, one that's similar to the population in terms of demographics. If you use the first one, you're sort of hoping that it will be roughly representative just because you have a big sample and you're doing it randomly. And if your sample's big enough, odds are it will be roughly representative. All right, you get 1,000 people, it should be roughly half male, half female, etc., or whatever the population is. If you're doing stratified random sampling, you force it to be representative for the variables that you care about. So let's say you know you're getting 1,000 people in your sample, and you know that, again, let's say UBC, you know that UBC is 50% female. It's probably more than that, but let's just suppose. Then you say, once we hit 500 females, no more females. Or you could be more fine-grained than that. You could say, once we hit 50 East Asian females from the ages of 18 to 20, no more East Asian females, once we hit that number. So you can stratify by as many demographic variables as you want, but the point is you are then forcing the sample to be representative. Although it's still random, so you still have the random number generator picking the people. It just stops picking people from a certain group once that number is hit. Another one which don't worry about for the test is cluster sampling, but you may see it occasionally mentioned. So here, what the random number generator is picking is groups to sample. So again, think of the UBC case. You care about UBC, students at UBC. You get the random number generator to pick a set of classes to sample. So let's say there's 500 classes at UBC. The random number generator picks 12 of them, and then you ask everyone in those 12 classes. So that's clusters. But for the test, worry about the first two. Any questions? Yeah.
Can you just define probability? probability sampling one more time. So it's when you can calculate like the odds of anyone being in the.
Yeah, exactly. And the way to think about that, really, because we're focusing on the first two, is just for the first two, anyone's chance of being in the survey is equal. That's key, right? So like when the only type of probability we need to worry about is the random type. Random means everyone's probability of getting in the sample is the same. Yeah.
Okay.
Any other questions? Yes.
Doesn't it being stratified kind of change the probability after one group is filled?
Yes, I guess after one group is filled, then it's no longer true that everyone has an equal chance. But at the beginning of the sampling process, if the cutoffs you've set are the same as the numbers in the population or the percentages in the population, then at the beginning everyone should have the same chance.
Could you give an example of stratified sampling?
Yeah, for sure. So let's say we'll stick with UBC. So you want a representative sample from UBC, and let's say that 5% of students at UBC are white dudes from 18 to 19. Then, and you're gonna get 1,000 people. So once you get, I guess that's 50. Once you hit 50 white dudes 18 to 19, no more white dudes 18 to 19. That's that one is. So,
I have a question.
oh, yep.
Is that the only way to do stratified sampling, or is it possible to like do other methods to get the final result?
What do you mean by?
Like, is the only method to collect people who's doing study and then cut off, or is there other methods for stratified methods?
Yeah, no, it means there's cutoffs. Like it means that because if you're getting if it's stratified random sampling, there's still a random number generator picking who's in it, and it's just that once you hit the number, no more people from that point. So for even though these are better, these first two, they are very rarely used in psychology. Random assignment, very commonly used. It's very easy, you just program it into Qualtrics. The most common, in my experience, by far the most common, is convenience sampling. So non-probability, as you could probably guess, just means you can't specify what people's probability of being in the sample is. So convenience sampling basically means you take who you can get. You put the word out there that people can do this study, and whoever signs up, that's who's in the study. Easy to do, but there's basically no effort put into making sure the sample is representative. As I say, sadly, that is most research in psychology. Another one, which is similar to, this is basically the equivalent of stratified, but for non-probability sampling, is quota sampling. So it's the same idea. You set demographic cutoffs. So like I said, once you hit X number of white dudes 18 to 19 or whatever it is, then no more. But there's no random number generator anymore. There's no process of randomly picking people. It's still just whoever shows up, whoever answers the phone, what have you. So it's better than convenience. It's definitely a step up because now you're making some effort in ensuring the sample is representative, but only for as many variables, as many demographic variables as you pick. So in my whole career in grad school, I did this exactly once, and that's more than most. So there was one study I was a part of where we had quota cutoffs, I think just for age and gender. This is when I was living in the States, so we wanted a representative sample for the whole, for the US, so we had the numbers of how many, 20 to 30-year-old males there are in the US, and then we set cutoffs on that basis. The last one, which is again one that's not testable, is purposive sampling. I guess you could think of this as sort of more narrow quota sampling, where you're only interested in one group. So like, you know, you just recruit, I don't know, black men ages 40 to 50, whatever you care about. So you've almost given up on being representative at that point. But as I say, that last one, don't really worry about it. The ones that are testable are the first two on the whiteboard for each type. Although I think in the key terms list, this one's in the middle. But I put this one here because it's similar in structure to stratify random sample. Okay. Any questions about, let's say, the 4 testable sampling methods? Okay, one term that should be obvious, but since it's testable, I'll throw it out there. Sample size just means how many people you got. So this will be reported in a paper as n equals such and such. So you get 332 people, n equals 332. There are a number of advantages of getting a bigger sample. One advantage is you get smaller confidence intervals. A confidence interval has to do with your confidence that the population value is in a certain range. So, you know, let's say you're trying to estimate the height, the average height in Canada. So the population is Canada, and you get a sample and you find that the average height here, let's say it's Canadian males. No idea what the average is put together. Let's say the average, you get a sample and the average height in your sample is 5'10". You don't know what the population value is. You just know what it is in your sample. But a confidence interval would be, you're confident it's in a certain range, maybe plus or minus 1 inch, for example. So the most common one that's used is the 95% confidence interval. So in that case, it would mean you're 95% sure, so let's say it's plus or minus 1 inch. That would mean you're 95% sure that in the population, the average height for Canadian males is between 5'9" and 5'11". You often see this reported in opinion polls, which I referenced earlier, right? You'll often see, okay, according to the poll, 42% of Canadian voters will vote for the Liberals, plus or minus 2%. Typically, what's being reported there is the 95% confidence interval.
That means that the confidence intervals are bigger?
So bigger sample, smaller confidence interval. Yeah. And so like think about that, right? Like just think of the opinion poll. So forget about numbers for a second. Suppose I ask 5 guys or 5 people who they're going to vote for, and I get an estimate. So 2 people say they're going to vote Liberals, and I say 40% of Canadians are going to vote Liberal. Your error bars in your head should be really wide. You have almost no idea how many people are going to vote for the Liberals. If I got a sample of 10,000 and I say 42.1% are going to vote Liberal, you'd be like, yeah, it's probably close to that. That's one way of making it intuitive. Now, there's a precise mathematical reason why bigger samples mean smaller confidence intervals, but just intuitively you should see that that's the case. A related term is sampling error, which is just, and you can't know how much there is, but it's it's the extent to which your estimate is different from the population value. So, I'll go back to the the opinion polling case. So there's a fact of the matter about how many people, what percentage of Canadian voters are planning to vote Liberal. You did your sample and you estimate it's 42. To what extent is this different from the true population value? That's sampling error.
So you measure that like after the election happened?
I suppose so. I could get kind of conceptual and say, well, here you're measuring intent to vote, and that's actual vote. But if you want to think about it that way, sure.
Yeah, I was gonna ask the same thing. How would you measure that? Like, how would you get that?
So the answer is often you just don't know. It's more theoretical. It's just, okay, God knows how many people are planning to vote for the Liberals. How far off is your estimate from God's?
So it's just a theoretical.
It's more theoretical. Okay, I think, yeah, just one more term. Now, the book does something frustrating here, which is it defines this concept in terms of null hypothesis significance testing, but it hasn't defined that yet. So I will define it without invoking null hypothesis significance testing. That's what we'll be talking about the first week after the test. But ignoring that, for the purposes of the test, power is the probability of detecting an effect if there is one. The probability of detecting an effect if there is one. So let's say in the population you're looking for a correlation between, let's use the thing from the survey, extroversion and happiness. So you don't know whether there's a correlation in the population or not. You'll make a conclusion based on your sample. And so power is, if there is, now we don't know if there is, but if there is a correlation in the population, what's the probability that you will detect it? That's power. And the connection to sample size is, the bigger the sample size, the more likely you are to detect the effect. Now, there's mathematical reasons for that. Ignore that for now. That's all you need to know for.
Does it, like, the size of the effect also matter? Not just
Yes.
the sample size?
Yeah, the size of the effect matters too. So if it's a bigger effect, you can detect it with a smaller sample.
I'm so sorry. Can you give a different example or another example?
Sure. Here's one that might be more intuitive. Let's say it's this pill. So I just invented this new IQ pill. It makes you well, I hope it makes you smarter. I have sciencey reasons to suspect it makes you smarter. And so I don't know yet if it works or not. So if the drug works, what's the probability that I will detect that it works? So obviously you want higher. You want it to be more likely that you would find that find the effect if it's there. And now there are other things too. So someone mentioned a bigger effect size means it's easier to detect, but all else being equal, a bigger sample size means more power. Yes.
For the purposes of the test, if I were to forget this and just define power as, like, in reference to, like, the null hypothesis or hypothesis testing, would that be considered wrong then?
No. So if you've taken other classes, now it's a little riskier then, because then there may be a greater chance of you making a mistake. But although even there, I'd probably still be, as long as you get the idea across.
Yeah.
That's fine. Yeah. If you'd rather define it in terms of the null hypothesis, that's fine. But as I say, none of you are required to define it that way. Okay. Any other questions? So, as I suspected, we have some time left. So, as I say, next week is test 1. So I'll do what I'm sure you all want me to do. I'll tell you what the 2 written answers will be. So I heard some people asking me about this. So just to remind you all of the tests, all 4 of them have the same format. There are 9 definition questions. So they will just be terms from that key terms list with a blank space underneath for you to write the definition. And there you can do 1 sentence or even point form as long as you get the ideas across. I mean, you have lots of time, you might as well write what you know. Each one of those is worth 1%, so 9 obviously. And then there are 2 written questions, each of which is worth 3 marks. So each test is thus worth 15%. So the written I will always tell you in advance. So the 2 written questions both come from the first lecture. One of them is about the criteria for making causal claims. There were 3 criteria. You have to explain what those are and connect them to a concrete example.
Repeat the question one more time.
For sure, yeah. So the 3 criteria for making a causal claim, so in other words, for saying that A causes B, you have to say what those are and connect them to a concrete example. I'm in a good mood. You can look at the lecture or at the book. The 3 are covariation, so I have to explain that. Temporal precedence, and ruling out alternative explanations. So those 3 better be on there, each of them explained, and each of them connected to a concrete example. Okay, I won't be as nice for the next one, but the question for the next one will be, what is a theory? And what are its 2 main functions? Okay, so there should be no blanks for the written. We'll know what it is, so you should come ready. Maybe just do that first, just get that out of the way, and then work on the definition questions. So we still have 20 minutes left, so here's what I'll say. So you can ask questions. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Just a clarifying question for the first written one.
Yeah.
Just one example is okay for like
Yes.
the 3 of them to connect them?
In fact, I would recommend that. You only have 1
Yeah.
page, so you could do a different one for each if you think you can fit it, but 1 is fine.
Can we make a hypothetical scenario, or is it?
Yes, absolutely. That's probably a better way to go, actually. So you can keep asking questions about any of the material. So any of the terms in chapters 1 through 4 is fair game, except for the handful that I said don't worry about. So you can spend the rest of the time asking me questions, or you can work on the Qualtrics thing, and I'm happy to help with that if you have an idea and want to start playing around with that. So the rest of the time belongs to you all.
Thank you.
Yep.
I had a question about what would it be? The secondary use of data.
Yeah.
Given that we have new information about the Savardo study, about how he influenced
Yeah.
forest people, could they then use that new information to create a new study with the data? For example, measuring exactly what Milgram was a study.
Oh, sure.
Obedience, they can do that kind of thing.
Oh, sure. I mean, the French guy, it wouldn't be like a study, but he did publish an article in a good journal, basically doing that.
Okay.
So, yeah. I don't think he had any quantitative stuff like correlate, but yeah, it was still an article that got published. What else I should say, you're free to go too. If you have no questions and you want to enjoy the beautiful weather, you're free to go anytime.